Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Press Club for hosting me here today. I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and recognise them and others with a connection to the lands of the ACT. Between 2022 and 2023, the Department of Home Affairs processed over 8 million visas for people wishing to come to Australia. To be approved, each applicant had to sign and agree to the Australian Values Statement, a list of shared values that ensure Australians and visitors look out for each other and collectively strive for the national common good. These values reflect the pillars of Australian society and the principles that enshrine the way we treat each other. It's a way of protecting our social cohesion and safeguards against criminal and illegal behaviour. And companies wanting to do business here also have to meet our standards and sign up to our rules, laws and expectations. But the global tech monopolies that have changed our lives and our nation choose not to meet those standards. They refuse to play by our rules. These tech giants, especially the social media networks such as Meta, TikTok and X, operate outside our legal system. We know the collective damage they cause to our young and elderly, businesses, big and small, to our democracy and to our economy. How long is Australia going to allow them to operate as protected species? It's been long enough, and this address is about what we can do about it. It's time. Before we look at the now, let's go back to the internet's wonder years. In the space of just one generation, we've gone from the magic that Tom talked about to madness. Remember when we first discovered search and when we learned we could find anything we wanted to know at the click of a button? Remember when our phones became smart, when we started sharing photographs and memories with joy and delight? Remember our first video calls with family we hadn't seen for years, when we first bought something online? That was before the online scams and blackmail, before cyberbullying and revenge porn, before doxing and trolling, deep fakes, conspiracies, the surveillance economy and political interference, before terrorists live-streamed massacres and sites celebrated anorexia as a glamorous lifestyle, before the epidemic of loneliness and anxiety, and before the algorithms turned us into addicts. The wonder years seem a very long time ago. Less than 1 year ago, a 45-year-old man used an explicit photo of his own teenage niece on Meta's Instagram to blackmail 16-year-old Mac Holdsworth. After being caught up in an evil online sexual extortion, Mac took his own life. And because of that, a family in Australia lost a respectful, cheeky, challenging, beautiful young man. They are the words of Mac's father, Wayne, who I'd like to acknowledge is here today. Wayne. It's impossible to understand your sorrow, but you and parents like you around Australia are driven to fight back, and that courage is inspiring. To the other parents here today who came to Canberra yesterday to meet with parliamentarians, I also thank you, Jane, Ali, Emma and Fiona. I'm struck by your courage and determination to see things change. The leading cause of death among Australians aged 15 to 24 is suicide. Mental health disorders among young people have soared by nearly 50% in 15 years. The problem started exploding as young people became addicted to social media. The blue thumbs up has a lot to answer for. But in January, Facebook creator Mark Zuckerberg told a congressional hearing in Washington that the existing body of scientific work has not shown a causal link between using social media and young people having worse mental health. Government statisticians and mental health experts, and especially the parents of children we have lost, know otherwise. Recent research in Australia asked 3,000 social media users about their digital lives and attitudes. 7 out of every 10 said they or someone they know had first-hand experience of negative issues on social media. For teenagers, the number is even higher, and the range of harms they talk about is even longer than those I listed a few moments ago. There is no doubt our children are paying the price, but Mark Zuckerberg denies there's even a problem. Last week, I was speaking to Andrew Forrest to learn more about his campaign to stop Meta from allowing his image to be used in scam advertisements that are stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from vulnerable Australians. We've all seen those ads that hijack the faces of celebrities and respected business leaders and trick people into sending their life savings to criminals. At the height of his use of his image, up to 7 different ads pretending to be Andrew were being generated every day. He has fought for years to get Meta to stop them, but they won't. The online scam business is exploding. The Australian recently reported of the scandemic and the rise of scam factories in Southeast Asia. Some scam factories are as big as university campuses. One in the Philippines is made up of more than 30 buildings, and national economies are now being shaped by this new criminal industry. The National Anti-Scam Centre reports that Australians lost $2.7 billion to scams last year. Globally, cyber scamming is now said to represent the world's 3rd largest economy behind the US and China. The list of what's going wrong just keeps getting longer. Misinformation and disinformation designed to cause real harm is leading people down dangerous algorithmic rabbit holes. Addiction and doom scrolling are now parts of our lives, and we say things to people online we wouldn't dare to say to them face to face. Misogyny among young men is appallingly rife. 65% of Australian girls and young women report being harassed or abused by boys online. Almost all our elite female athletes have been subject to body shaming and trolling. West Australian newspapers reported in March about the explosion in online sexual exploitation, with 32 million reports on major platforms each year. This is just the tip of a very large iceberg. In the words of Cybersecurity Minister Claire O'Neil, just about every problem that we have as a country is either being exacerbated by or caused by social media. And we're not seeing a skerrick of responsibility taken by these companies. And why is this happening? Because on social media, bad behaviour is good for business. The social media giants, they profit from evil videos. They profit from bullying. They profit from online con artists. They profit from glamorising eating disorders. In the words of a British father who, like Wayne, lost their child to suicide, they monetise misery. In Meta's case, according to a recent report in the UK's Sunday Times magazine, that profit is a staggering $136 million every single day. It's understandable that we focus on the content that is causing the harm, but the other truly damaging aspect of all this is the partnership between the content and the conduct of the businesses that distribute it. The content and the conduct are partners in crime. We know this is the case from Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen. She says that Facebook knew its algorithms were damaging teenagers' mental health. It knew that posts instigated ethnic violence in countries like Ethiopia, and it failed to curb misinformation before the Capitol Hill riots on January 6. Around the world, people are demanding that the days of the digital Wild West have to stop. The algorithms and those that operate them in total secrecy are the biggest villains. It's time we made them accountable. Australia was one of the first countries to be disrupted by the online revolution, and media was one of the first industries. Australian companies like car sales and realestate.com were among the first in the world to break out from print channels and onto the internet. News companies pushed into the digital space. We took on the challenge. We innovated. With Meta's decision to walk away from its deals to pay Australian news companies for their content, our industry is in new territory once again. Media may be a business, but remember, journalism is vital to democracy. It ensures that citizens are informed, engaged, and capable of holding their leaders to account. Without a local news media, transparency, accountability, and public participation, the founding principles of democracy are significantly weakened. The ACCC has ruled that for media companies, Meta is an unavoidable trading partner. And in 2021, Parliament determined that Meta should pay for the news it uses. We had a deal, they walked away. I believe they have an obligation to renew the agreements and honour our laws. It is intriguing that Meta has no problem turning off the news, but has a big problem turning off teenage fight clubs, the bullying of young women, or scam advertising. Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones captured the situation when he says that Meta is for criminals and against journalism. After Meta had turned off the news in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau commented that Meta were prioritising profit over safety as devastating wildfires forced tens of thousands to evacuate their homes. Faced with that scenario playing out in Australia, we cannot let ourselves be bullied. Meta must be designated under the Media Bargaining Code and challenged to negotiate in good faith. News media is the canary in the coal mine, and the current battle in my industry is part of a much larger struggle, a struggle that will encompass and impact more industries and more people. As a nation, we must not blink now. Commonwealth Bank CEO Matt Coleman told the Australian Financial Review in March, "The world has never seen global monopolies of the size and scale of today's big tech companies. These companies have immense power, and it is critical that they do not undermine Australian sovereignty." Matt told me later that it's reasonable to expect that all companies benefiting from Australians should rightly contribute to a more prosperous Australia. He said that big tech should not free ride on other Australian industries, leaving the cost, investment and regulatory obligations to local companies. No company should be too big to regulate. Let's pause here and go back in time to those early wonder years of the internet and imagine for a moment we had a crystal ball. If we could have looked into the future and seen a world where a handful of companies had privatised the internet, created multi-billion-dollar advertising monopolies, and exposed billions of people to harmful content while turning their noses up at nations around the world, would we have been okay with that? Even before nations like Australia could answer that question, America had already given the tech industry the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It gave tech companies a blanket exemption from responsibility under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This created a Silicon Valley sovereignty that now lets them get away with anything. And it's no care and no responsibility, and it's created a global crisis. In the early days of the digital revolution, US lawmakers created a permissive environment for their innovators to flourish. But that was before these startups grew up. Now that they have become some of the most profitable and impactful companies the world has ever seen, even American regulators and politicians know that time is up. Recently, politicians from across the political divide jointly wrote in the Wall Street Journal saying Section 230 is now poisoning the healthy online ecosystem it once fostered. Big tech companies are exploiting the law to shield themselves from responsibility or accountability. They concluded Congress's failure to revisit this law is irresponsible and untenable. So, what can Australia do about these tech giants? Fines don't work. Meta has been a frequent target of regulators. In the last 2 years, numerous penalties have been levelled against Meta for breaking EU data and privacy laws. In May last year, Meta was fined €1.2 billion by the Irish Data Protection Commission for putting the data of EU citizens at risk. As of last week, there are at least 30 enforcement actions against Meta around the globe. But when does this money get paid? Their usual pattern is to fight any ruling against them through appeals in the courts for years. The tech monopolies love to use the law to protect their right to be above the law. When the threat of regulation comes in their direction, the tech monopoly has a playbook. They declare that they want to be regulated, but no solution is ever workable for them. Then they insist that regulation should be harmonised across jurisdictions. And that tactic is playing out again now. Meta argues that since digital platforms are global, regulation should be global and not country-specific. And it knows that such a global agreement is never going to happen. What it is really saying is that the US get-out-of-jail-free card should apply globally. So why should sovereign nations with their own cultures and identities to protect agree that America's rules should apply to them? As nations like Australia and individuals like Andrew Forrest wage legal fights against the tech monopolies, it may end up that the case for change will be proved by losing in court rather than by winning. In the recent case about a Sydney bishop being stabbed on video, the Australian government lost its attempt to have the video taken down across the globe. While X eventually voluntarily took it down in Australia, if they hadn't, Elon Musk would have done as Meta has done. He would have argued that his company doesn't actually operate in Australia. Another way to say, your rules don't apply to us. Faced with this exact situation, Andrew Forrest has taken his legal fight to the place Meta does run its business from, the United States. I suspect he will lose there as well, because in the United States, Meta will argue that on its home turf, it's protected by its Section 230 shield. So if you're a Silicon Valley sovereign, courts outside the US can't touch you, and inside the US, you're a protected species. The proof of how important this is to the tech monopolies is seen in the way they repeatedly try to insert language that enshrines their American protection into trade agreements with other countries. In his response to X's fight to keep the stabbing video on its platform, Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones said, "We don't think the rules of the jungle should apply on social media platforms. We think the rules of a civil society should apply there. Just because they're operated internationally doesn't mean they shouldn't be abiding by Australian law." The establishment of the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee into the influence and impacts of Meta, TikTok and X on Australian society provides a forum where all these issues can be aired, from the community harms to the commercial threats. It's time to stop asking for change and start demanding change. On behalf of 27 million Australians, the Australian government has the mandate and the ability to re-establish and reassert itself as the representatives and rule makers of Australia by resetting the rules for global platforms' access to Australians. It's time for them to play by our rules. Communications Minister Michelle Rowland recently described the situation like this. We're up against these giant companies, multinationals who have more power, money and global influence than some standalone nations. They have deep pockets. They are highly litigious, but that is no reason why they should not be subject to Australian law, and we should seek to enforce Australian law. I couldn't agree more. The words social licence describe the permission companies have to operate within a society. The tech monopolies should also be made to pay a licence. This social licence would be a package of laws and requirements the tech monopolies would need to meet if they want access to Australian consumers. Under this licence, the Australian government would be able to make platforms liable for all the content that is amplified, curated and controlled by their algorithms or recommender engines, now hiding behind Section 230 in Australia. The licence should require that each platform has an effective consumer complaints handling system, including call centres contactable by telephone with expert staff in Australia. Other measures to be included: the ex-ante competition framework set out by the ACCC, which would address the problem of the monopolised digital advertising markets. A contribution to the money we are spending tackling mental health problems. A requirement for the tech platforms proven to be media's unavoidable trading partners would be to honour the media bargaining code and compensate all publishers and media companies. Penalties should also be included. Penalties that incorporate criminal sanctions for companies and their executives that agree to the licence but then break the rules. And the power to ultimately block access to our country and our people if they refuse to play by our rules. This idea of a social licence is neither overreach nor pie in the sky. Let's go back to a real-world example. A company may want to come to Australia to mine the mineral of the moment, copper. We rightly regard copper as Australian property, and if you want to extract it, here are just a few of the things that Australia requires. You will pay a royalty on the copper to access the copper. You will fairly negotiate with the landowners. You will hire Australians and meet all our industrial relations standards, safety requirements and awards. You will meet all environmental requirements and you will pay to fix any damage you cause or face penalties. In my view, the tech monopolies are also mining companies. But they don't mine our minerals, they mine our lives. And those lives are Australia's greatest resource. And we have a responsibility to protect ourselves and the way we want to live. If a company wants the right to access every part of our lives so they can profit from our habits and choices, so it can sell us the goods and its machine thinks we want, so it can take on our existing industries and business practices, then there's a price to pay for that access. Penalties to pay for any damage caused. While some may be shocked by this list of requirements, no business leader here would be surprised. Every bank and telco has to meet the standards of complaints handling set out by the law. Every media company is required by law to accept total responsibility for everything it publishes. No advertising business can run fake ads using the identities of Australia's most well-known people. And no other business can scoop up its competitors and totally dominate a marketplace. In short, all businesses accessing Australian people play by these rules, except the tech monopolies. It's time that changed. It's time for a level playing field. What choices would the social media giants face if Australia did impose this social licence? They could sign up or not, their choice. And if Meta or TikTok or X walked away, my response would be, it won't be the end of the world. We all know that innovation occurs in the digital space, and the tech monopolies know how quickly this void would be filled. The wonder years are over. Australians are no longer in awe of social media. 75% are very or extremely concerned about frauds and scams. 83% believe that the tech monopolies should be subject to Australian regulations and laws. Australians overwhelmingly say that social media should play by the same rules as the rest of us. I've talked about social and legal issues that relate to these tech giants, but at its core is the issue of human rights. We all have a right to feel safe and respected. Online violence, harassment and bullying are human rights issues that profoundly affect the lives of Australians. When scammers steal $2.7 billion a year from vulnerable Australians, the loss is felt through the healthcare system, through social welfare, and in additional pensions paid to people who have lost everything. Have no doubt we will be paying the social and economic cost of this social media crisis for decades. It's time to reset our digital environment to protect vulnerable people rather than prey on them. It's time for a reset to protect the next generation of children like Mac. It's time to protect our parents and our national identity. It's time for the tech monopolies to play by Australia's rules. Thank you for listening.